Welcome to Channel Legendarium. Today for episode 5, appropriately enough, we are going to be covering 5 Cinderella stories from across Europe. The Cinderella that we know follows a young woman named, of course, Cinderella. Her mother dies when she is still a young girl, and her father remarries your standard issue wicked stepmother, complete with 2 wicked stepsisters. The wicked stepfamily proceeds to make Cinderella's life horrible, turning her into a servant and abusing her all the time. Some years later, when the king announces a ball to help his son pick a bride, the stepfamily goes off to try to win the heart of the prince while keeping Cinderella locked up in the house. Fortunately, Cinderella has an ace in the hole in the form of her fairy godmother. The fairy godmother transforms a pumpkin into a carriage, transforms rats into horses, and gives Cinderella a beautiful gown with gold slippers to wear. However, when Cinderella goes to the ball, while she does capture the attention and then the heart of the prince, she leaves one of her glass slippers behind. The prince picks up the glass slipper and tries it on the foot of every maiden in the kingdom before he finally comes across Cinderella. The shoe fits, and he whisks her off to begin a new career as a princess. However, this is only one of the 500 versions of Cinderella that made the rounds in Europe during the Middle and Modern Ages. So let's take a look at 5 other versions of Cinderella. First, there is Ashley Pelt, the Cinderella of Ireland. Ashley Pelt's story starts off very familiar. Her mother dies, her father remarries, and her stepmother forces her to become a servant in her own house. Much like the Cinderella we know, Ashley Pelt, however, has an ace in the hole, namely her mother, who came back in the form of a black sheep, specifically a black ewe. And when the prince announces the royal ball so that he can find a new bride, it is the black ewe rather than the fairy godmother who provides her with the dress. Of course, Cinderella loses her shoe on the way out of the ball, and the prince goes looking for her. Fortunately, this prince doesn't have to look very long because the black ewe tells him where Ashley Pelt is. The prince, apparently not questioning directions from a black sheep, finds Ashley Pelt, the shoe fits, and she's whisked off to become a princess. One thing that's notable about Ashley Pelt's story is the role played by witches. Ghosts. The ghost of Ashley Pelt's mother proves to be the decisive factor in the story. Now, Ashley Pelt's mother is part of a long Irish tradition of ghosts, some of which are evil and cause mischief among the living, but some of which are good and help their loved ones achieve happiness through supernatural means. And obviously, Ashley Pelt was lucky that her mother came back to help her reach her happily ever after. Up next, we've got the German version of Cinderella, the one made famous by the Brothers Grimm. This is Aschenputtel. Aschenputtel's story starts off familiar. Her mother dies, and her father remarries the wicked stepmother and 2 wicked stepsisters who turn her into a servant. The father leaves on a business trip and asks the 3 girls, his 2 stepdaughters and his 1 real daughter, what they would like. While the 2 wicked stepsisters want gold and silver and all things shiny, Aschenputtel simply wants the first stick to touch his hat. This turns out to be a stick from a rose bush which he brings her. She plants in her mother's grave, and she cries over her mother's grave so much that the rose stick grows flowers and a family of doves nest there. It is notable that Aschenputtel's father remains alive throughout the story and basically allows his new wife and stepdaughters to abuse his only real daughter, thus making him a straight-up villain in the piece. While the doves help Cinderella with the household chores, her life takes a turn for the better when the king of her home country announces a ball to help pick a bride for his son. Of course, Cinderella gets her dress not from a fairy godmother, but from the family of doves who have nested in the rose bush at her mother's grave. As is par for the course, she leaves a slipper behind, and the prince sets out to find the foot it fits. However, this is where the story becomes very different from what we know. Cinderella's two wicked stepsisters are so greedy and so obsessed with becoming the next princess that they chop off parts of their own feet to make them fit, with one stepsister taking off a big toe and the other slicing off a heel. The prince would have probably noticed that these shoes were starting to leak blood. However, he has an easier time of it since the doves come in and tell him that the wicked stepsisters are cheating, and of course, Cinderella is whisked off to become the next princess. However, the wicked stepsisters still haven't learned a valuable lesson about greed, and they proceed to become some of the first wedding crashers in history when they show up at Cinderella's marriage and try to worm their way back into her favor. However, Aschenputtel's animal friends are having none of it, and the family of doves from the rose bush fly into the church and peck out the eyes of Aschenputtel's two wicked stepsisters, thus leaving them blind, crippled beggars, while Aschenputtel lives it up in the palace. Obviously, the biggest difference is the gory punishments meted out to the stepsisters. The reason for this is because German folklore had a long tradition of villains coming to gruesome ends. This was a way to scare both children and adults into walking the straight and narrow, because if you're greedy or if you're bad, doves will come and peck your eyes out. Indeed, these gruesome punishments were a part of everyday life in Germany. Only a generation before the Grimm brothers started writing, it was possible for a German lord to punish a faithless servant by nailing his ear to a wall, then giving him a knife, so he'd have to get himself free by cutting off his own ear. Next, we get Pepeleska, the Bulgarian Cinderella. This one has a very different fate for the mother in store. Ironically, it's caused by Pepeleska herself, who goes playing in a magic cave even after some forest spirits tell her to stay out. And when she goes back home from play, she finds that her mother has turned into a cow. Her father then remarries, not knowing what happened to his wife, and the new stepmother proceeds to do the usual wicked stepmother routine, turning Pepeleska into the family servant. She is an especially cruel and vicious stepmother, often beating Pepeleska and threatening to murder her if she cannot complete impossible chores, like picking up peas that the stepmother scattered across the kitchen floor. Fortunately, Pepeleska's stepmother is able to help her out with the household chores, thus saving her life. Pepeleska's stepmother in time realizes that the magical mother cow is helping Pepeleska, so she has the cow butchered and serves her up for dinner, even trying to force Pepeleska to eat her own mother. Now, Pepeleska, of course, refuses, and she instead gives her mother a Christian funeral behind the house. And the grave site of the mother is what serves the role of the fairy godmother in Pepeleska's version, giving her beautiful gowns to wear to church services. While she's attending a service at the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, she catches the eye of the emperor's son. Being shy, she runs away 3 times from the emperor's son, but on the 3rd time she leaves her shoe behind, and by now you know what happens. However, Pepeleska is not as forgiving as we often think of Cinderella being. One of her first orders as Empress-in-Waiting is to have the head of her wicked stepmother chopped off, soaked in tar, and put on display outside the palace gates. Now, besides being a lot more gruesome, you've probably noticed that the Bulgarian Cinderella features the church very prominently, with Pepeleska meeting her emperor's son there instead of at a royal ball. This shows the great importance of the Eastern Orthodox Church in Southern European culture, both then and now. In addition, it features a talking animal helping Pepeleska through her trials and tribulations. This is because Southern European folklore often does feature talking animals. Now up to Little Saddlesore, the Greek Cinderella. Little Saddlesore's mother comes to the most horrific end of any of the Cinderella mothers we've discussed so far. Little Saddlesore's mother is murdered by her own daughters. apparently because she can't stop dropping a thimble, because that's the best way to resolve family disputes. But it doesn't stop there. Little Saddlesore's sisters then proceed to cook and eat their own mother. Little Saddlesore, being the only good sister in the bunch, refuses to touch the mother meat and instead smokes the mother's bones with incense for 40 days before burying them. As in the case of Papaleska, the grave site becomes the fairy godmother, giving her both mountains of gold for her faithfulness and along with dresses to wear. Little Saddlesore proceeds to wear those dresses to church services where she catches the eye of the emperor's son, as in the Bulgarian version. Again, like the Bulgarian version, Little Saddlesore is very shy despite wearing these beautiful dresses and giving huge mountains of gold to the poor who gather at the steps of the Orthodox Church. However, the third time that Little Saddlesore tries to flee the emperor's son, she of course leaves her shoe behind, and everybody knows what happens. However, Little Saddlesore's wicked stepsisters aren't finished. They sneak into the palace, nail her into a barrel, and send her out to sea, intending to drown her. However, it is God himself, God Almighty, who guides Little Saddlesore's barrel to a desert island where he builds her a house and plants a fruit tree so that she'll be happy and healthy until her husband, the emperor's son, comes to save her. And Little Saddlesore, in her first act as Empress in Waiting, orders the heads cut off of all of her wicked sisters. Now, one thing you've probably noticed about both Greek and Bulgarian Cinderella is that she marries an emperor's son instead of a handsome prince. The reason for this is because Greece, Bulgaria, and the rest of southern Europe were ruled by the Ottoman Turkish Empire for over 400 years. The Ottoman Empire was ruled by a sultan called an emperor in most European languages. And that is why Cinderellas in southern Europe marry emperors' sons instead of princes. One thing that is striking about both the Bulgarian and Greek Cinderellas is that the Turkish imperial family are shown as Christians, attending church services every Sabbath. That would have no doubt come as a great surprise to the Turkish imperial family, who were practicing Muslims. This also shows one other part of Southern European folklore, as it was common in Southern Europe for folk heroes to be saved by God or Jesus, again showing the importance of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The version of Cinderella we are most familiar with is the French version, called Cendrillon. This is the same thing as what we are familiar with a few minor changes. It was written, by the way, by Charles Perrault, the man who did more to popularize fairy tales than any man before the Brothers Grimm. Among the changes that we have is that at the end of the story, Cinderella forgives her two wicked stepsisters and sees them married to noble lords. In addition, in Perrault's original Cendrillon, Cendrillon wears squirrel fur slippers instead of glass. So why do we often think of glass slippers when we think of Cinderella? Well, the French words for fur and glass at the time were almost the same. And this caused the translator in England to make a mistake and give Cinderella glass slippers instead of fur slippers when she first started to appear to English-speaking readers, and it stuck. So why do we know the French version best of all? Well, that's largely because of filmmakers like Georges Méliès. In 1988, Georges Méliès made a version of Cendrillon, of course picking the French version, seeing as how he was French. Now, this was the first of almost 30 versions of Cinderella, most of which look to Georges Méliès' Cendrillon and Charles Perrault's Cinderella for inspiration, including the 1950 animated film. And that is why when we think of Cinderella, we're actually thinking of the French version, Cendrillon. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.